Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm writer coach Tony, and this afternoon we're going to answer a question posed by one of my um, uh, one of the regular persons who has been asking me questions. Her name is Tin Alegre, and this afternoon she asked me um, to talk about hypothesis testing, no? And then what are type 1 and type 2 errors, and then how do you determine the significance level, and finally, um, how do you know when to use one-tailed or two-tailed tests. So anyway, we can start with hypothesis testing. So when do you use hypothesis testing? Usually when you do a quantitative study or even a qualitative study, you have to pose a hypothesis. And when you're doing research work, you have to pose a hypothesis. So there are two types of hypotheses you have to do. You have to formulate. You have the null hypothesis. The symbol is H sub O, so you have the letter H and an O below. And then you have H sub 1, which is the alternative hypothesis. So the idea there is either you accept or you reject the null hypothesis, based on the results. No? If the statistical results come in, um, whatever statistical formula you use, the t-test, ANOVA, you will know whether it will fall within the significance level. No? So if it does fall in significance level, you accept the null hypothesis. But if it doesn't fall in significance level, you reject the null hypothesis. So you accept the alternative hypothesis. So that's when you accept the alternative hypothesis. Why? How do you write a null hypothesis? So null hypothesis, so just identify the variables you want to relate, in your study. If there is no relationship, that's your null hypothesis. So when you write your null hypothesis, it's all, there is no significant relationship, there is no significant difference, there is no significance. So it's always no, no, no. Okay. For example, there is no significant relationship between wearing masks and getting COVID-19. Now that would be an example of a null hypothesis. There is no relationship between studying 1 hour every day and getting a grade of outstanding in your science class. So these are just hypothetical examples of null hypothesis. What I'm saying is that when you say null hypothesis, it's all it has to say there is no significant relationship. Then you compare your variables. The second, then your alternative hypothesis, you form it by taking out the no word. So for example, your null hypothesis says there is no significant relationship between wearing a mask and getting COVID-19. So your alternative hypothesis would be there is a significant relationship between wearing a mask and getting COVID-19. So you just flip your null hypothesis. So it's either you accept or reject your null. If you accept your null hypothesis, you reject the alternative hypothesis. If you reject your null hypothesis, you accept your alternative hypothesis. So at least it sets the standard it sets the thing you want to find out in your research. So once you have the hypothesis, you can now use your statistics to find out if there is a significant relationship or not. No, you can determine that by um, imposing your significance level. Usually, it's alpha equals 0.05. That's the usual standard in research that we use in terms of significance level. So how do you understand that? No, for example, you have a normal curve. The normal curve, and you have these two sides. No, you have the negative and the positive side. Usually, you want both sides. No, because we want to know what happens to the variable. We want to cover all the possibilities, no, when on what happens to a variable. That's why we prefer to use both sides, no. So usually, if you want 5% significance level, that means when you mark it here, that's 0.025, no, 0.025 on both negative and positive sides. Actually, you're just saying that this is a critical region. The shaded part, the 0.025 on both sides are the critical region. It means if your results fall in the critical region, we can reject your null hypothesis. So if your value stays there, that means you have to reject your null hypothesis. That means there is a significant relationship between the variables you are comparing. So that will be the conclusion, no? The outcome of your study. So that significance level is already high. No, it means it's very far from your mean, the mean of the sample. That means there is a relationship between the variables you are studying. And anyway, the statistical part, usually the statistician will be the one who will determine already if if the variables you're studying has a significant relationship or not. So it's important that you, the researcher, who is formulating all these questions, these statements, should make your statements be very clear, so that when your respondents answer, you can get the outcome that you want. No, so we've answered 3 questions already. Number 1, hypothesis testing. So now you know how to formulate a null hypothesis and an alternative hypothesis. Null hypothesis, palaging no significant relationship. No? Pag alternative, yung opposite lang nun. There is a significant relationship. There is a significant difference. No? So, then number 2, we discussed the significance level. No? So, normally pegged it at 5% or 95%. That means that's the area under the curve. So, that's mostly where your respondents will answer. But sometimes the answer would fall in the critical region, and that would make the results of your study significant. Now we'll talk about. Tin was also asking about the type 1 and the type 2 errors. So sometimes I get confused about this, but so anyway, here's what it is. When you have a type 1 error, you reject the null hypothesis even if it's correct. No, you reject the null hypothesis even if it's correct. So for example, so you reject the null hypothesis even if it's correct. So there is no relationship between wearing a mask and getting COVID-19. But of course, we know that there is a relationship, no? We know that there is a relationship. If you do not wear a mask, the possibility of getting COVID-19 is very high. So, if you reject this null hypothesis, even if it's correct, that's an example of a false positive, no? What will happen is, the consequence of doing that would be, you will get COVID-19. No? Kasi when you say there's no significant relationship between wearing a mask and getting COVID-19, you're saying that do not wear a mask. So but what scientists or what we're finding out is that if you do not wear a mask, you will most likely get COVID-19. So that is an example of a type 1 error, and that will be a false positive. The other one is type 2 error, and we call it a false negative. So right now, I'm sure you always hear it from the news. False negative yung resulta ng COVID-19. False negative yung COVID test mo. No? So what is a type 2 error? What we call a false negative. You fail to reject a null hypothesis, but actually mali siya. No? So again, let's go back. There is no significant relationship. No, let's change it. There's no significant relationship between. Let's see. I cannot think of an example. For example, if you get tested, no, for COVID-19, and you really have COVID-19, no. So wait. Not that. Oh, let's see here. Hyperactivity is not related to eating sugar. So you fail to reject. So you accept. Okay, you accept that hyperactivity has no relationship to eating sugar. So what happens is you keep giving your kids sugar, so they get hyperactivity. So it's a false negative. Let's say wearing a mask is not related to getting COVID-19. So you fail to reject. Okay, once again, let's go back to the discussion of false negatives in testing for COVID-19. A false negative result happens when you have COVID-19, but the virus is not detected. No? So you have COVID-19, but the test does not detect it. So then that's a false negative, because you actually have the disease. Now that's why there are two tests. No? Well, I'm not going to comment on that because I'm not a medical technologist, but I remember there are two tests, and if you use, I think the immune system test, if that comes out as negative or positive, that's if it comes out positive, you still have to do the other test to ensure that it's really a positive. No? So it's not a guarantee that that you are really negative from the virus. No? So that can be an example of false negative. No? So pag false negative, you do not reject the null hypothesis. You fail to reject it, but it's actually false. No? So you fail to reject it. You accept the alternative hypothesis, but you fail to reject the null hypothesis. I mean, you accept the null hypothesis when actually it's false. No? So it's like having when they say, "Oh, you don't have COVID-19," but you actually have COVID-19, so you get false negative. No? And then finally, when do you use one-tailed or two-tailed na test? No? So I've never actually used two-tailed. It's always been I've never actually used one-tailed. Sorry. I've never actually used one-tailed. Most of my students always use two-tailed, no, not one-tailed. Because for two-tailed, you can get both the positive and the negative differences, no, when you answer. For example, if you're comparing two groups, and then you want to know if group A scores higher or lower than group B, you want to use a two-tailed test. No? You only use the one-tailed test if you actually one-tailed test also has a use, no, but it's only for studies where you want assurance about a certain variable that does not go the other way. No, here it says that um, if you're predicting that group A scores higher, no, for example, but you cannot predict that group A scores lower because you only use the one-tailed test. So what I'm saying is when you use the one-tailed test, you just want to focus on one particular behavior of the variables, no, between the two groups you're comparing. So you're only focusing on um, one type of behavior. So you cannot measure the other behavior because you're using only one-tailed test. But if you want to measure both the positive and the negative parts of your variable, then you use the two-tailed test. No? In most cases, um, most teachers would ask you to use a two-tailed test. Um, you only use a one-tailed test if you're not interested in the possibility of the opposite outcome, and if you really want to find out the results of a specific prediction that you gave for your study. So again, we discussed hypothesis testing, how to make a hypothesis, how to identify a type 1 and a type 2 error. A type 1 error is false positive. That means you reject a null hypothesis when it's actually true. No? When in type 2, it's you fail to reject null hypothesis when it's actually false. So that's a false negative. That's for type 2 error. And then we discuss significance level, which is normally 0.5, so 95% significance level. And in your normal curve, that would be 0.025 on the right and 0.025 on your left. If your values fall within that range, then there is a significant relationship between your variables. And then you only use your one-tailed test if you want a specific to confirm your prediction, a specific aspect of your prediction. Otherwise, if you want to measure both reactions of your variables, then you have to use a two-tailed test. My students use a two-tailed test because they want to know if there's a relationship when a variable affects another variable. They're not very specific. I haven't seen yet a study where the student just wanted to focus on one particular aspect of the relationship of her variables. So most of my students have used the two-tailed tests. So I hope I was able to answer your question, Tin. To those who haven't followed me yet, please follow me on my Facebook, my Twitter, and my Instagram. And please subscribe to my channel, please. And then if you have any more questions about research, please feel free to send me a message. No? My WhatsApp, my Viber is there along with my email address. Feel free to leave me a note, and if I have experience with that type of question, I will definitely answer you. So take care, everyone. Keep safe from the virus.